Hello and welcome back. We are discussing Chapter 6, Percents, Lesson 2, Estimating with Percents, and this is the guided practice. So I want you to go ahead and get started with problems 1 through 7 and just choose which fraction is the best estimate for each given percent. Choose the letter of the best answer. For 24%, is it A, 1/2, B, 1/3, C, 1/4, or D, 1/5? All right, so go ahead and pause your device. Go through problems 1 through 7. When you get done, press play, and we'll go over your results. All right, see you in a bit. Okay, let's see how you did. So I'm going to go ahead and use my table from last time up here. And what I know about 24% is very close to 25%, which means the answer would be 1/4. So it would be C. 73% is really close to 75%, which is the same thing as 3/4. So our answer would be G, 3/4. 51% is very close to 50%, which you should have memorized as 1/2. So the fraction closest to 51% would be 1/2. 32% is really close to 33 1/3%, which is the fraction 1/3. So the answer would be H. 39% is really close to 40%. So the fraction closest to 39% would be 2/5, which would be B. 12% is really close to 10%, and the fraction closest to 12% would be 1/10, J. And lastly, 19% is really close to 20%, which is the same thing as 1/5. So the fraction closest to 19% would be 1/5, which is D. Okay. So now that we did that, these next problems that we're going to do, I'm going to leave, let's see, I'm going to fold this really quickly so we still have access to this table here. Okay, and so what we're going to do for these problems, we are going to use a fraction to estimate the percent of each number. So for these, I want to do the two ways. We're going to do the estimate, and then we're going to find the actual value. Okay? So we're going to do the estimate first. Okay, and so 24% of 80. 24% is really close to 25%, which is the same thing as 1/4. So it's going to be 1/4 of, which is times 80. We're going to make it a fraction, 80 over 1. And then we're going to just multiply these two fractions. Always look to cross cancel first. So 4 goes into 4 one time, and 4 goes into 80 20 times. Then we just multiply across. 1 times 20 is 20. 1 times 1 is 1. So our answer, our estimate is 20. Okay? Now we're going to do the actual. And the actual value, we need to change this into a decimal. So we're going to move it 2 places to the left. So we're going to end up with 0.24 of is times 80. So this has 2 places, this one has 2 places, so it doesn't matter which one we put on top or the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and put 0.24 or just 0.24 on the top and put 80 on the bottom because it has a 0. And so that means the multiplication is easier because this first one, when I go 0, I just put a 0, and then I can move on to the next one. 8 times 4 is 32. I write the 2, carry the 3. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 3 is 19. Now I'm going to count the place values, which is there's 2 of them, which means my answer has to have 2, which means my answer is 19.20, which is really close to our estimate. Okay, so we're going to do one more together, and then I'm going to have you do the rest on your own. So let's go ahead and do the estimate first. You have to kind of write small. There's not a whole lot of space. So the estimate is here. 73% is really close to 75%. So we're going to use 3/4 of is times. We would round this to the nearest tenth. 44 would round it to the nearest tenth would be 40 over 1. Even though I could use 44 because I know that 4 goes into 44 11 times, and you know that would give me a more accurate response. But I'm going to round it to the nearest 10 and call it 40. 4 goes into both of these. 4 goes into 4 one time. 4 goes into 40 10 times, and then I multiply across. 3 times 10 is 30. 1 times 1 is just 1, so our answer is 30. Okay, then I'm going to do the actual. So that means I'm going to change this percentage into a decimal. To do that, I move the decimal 2 places to the left. So I end up with 0.73 of is times 44. This has 2 places. This has 2 places. It doesn't matter which one goes on top and which one goes on the bottom. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to put 0.73 on the top and 44 on the bottom. 4 times 3 is 12. Write the 2, carry the 1. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 1 is 29. I add the 0 because now I'm going to the tens place, and then I can start. 4 times 3 is 12. Write the 2, carry the 1. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 1 is 29. Then I add 2 plus 0 is 2. 9 plus 2 is 1, carry the 1. 8 plus 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11. Carry the 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. So then I just need to count the decimal places. There's 1, 2. Means my answer needs to have 1, 2. So the actual value is 31.12, which is very close to our estimate. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get started on problem 10. I want you to go ahead and find the estimate and the actual for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 on your own. So it's now time for you to pause your device, work those problems out. When you get done finding the estimate and the actual, and notice if you did it correctly, the estimate and the actual should be really, really close to each other. If they're really super, super far apart, then you know you did something wrong, and so you need to kind of recheck over the problem. So anyways, go ahead and press pause, work those problems out. When you get done, press play, and we'll go over the results. All right, see you in a bit. See you in a bit. All right, we are back. Let's go ahead and go over the estimate first. 51% is really close to 50%, which is 1/2 of is times 120. I'm going to write that as a fraction. So I have multiplying 2 fractions. I'm going to look to cross cancel. I know that 2 go into both of these because they're both even. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 goes into 120 60 times. I multiply across. 1 times 60 is 60. 1 times 1 is 1. So I know that my estimate is 60. Now I'm going to go ahead and find the actual value. To do that, I have to change this percentage into a decimal. I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. I end up with 0.51 of means times 120. So I just need to do the multiplication. Here, 0.51 has 2 places, 120 has 3 places, so that means I have to put 120 on top. And now I just multiply. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Now I'm in the tens place, so I need to add a 0 there. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 2 is 10. Carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Then I add 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus 0 is 2. 1 plus 0 is 1. And then 6. And now I just need to figure out the number of decimal places. 2 right there, decimal places. So our answer has to have 2 decimal places, which means the decimal goes right here. So it is, our actual answer is 61.20. which is super close to 60. So if you got those both right, the estimate and the actual, great job. Okay, now we're gonna go with problem 11. So for problem 11, we have 32% of 90. So we're gonna do the estimate first. Okay, so 32% is really, really close to 33 to third percent, which is the same thing as 1/3. So we're gonna go 1/3 times of means times 90 over 1. We're gonna make 90 over 1 a fraction. So we're looking to multiply fractions, which means we have to cross cancel first. I know that 3 goes into both of these. 3 goes into 3 one time, 3 goes into 90 30 times, and then I multiply across. 1 times 30 is 30. 1 times 1 is just 1, so I know that my estimate answer is just 30 because 30 over 1 is the same thing as 30. Now I'm going to do my actual here. My actual value is going to be 32% written as a decimal. So I'm going to move this over 2 places. So I have 0.32 of means times 90 is just 90. Okay, so this number has 2 places. This number has 2 places. I'm multiplying decimals. It doesn't matter since they both have the same amount of places, which one goes on the top and the bottom. I'm going to put 90 on the bottom because then I get to multiply by 0 and it just, things get done quicker when I do that. So it's going to be 0.32 times 90. I multiply by 0, which means I just put a 0 down, and then I can go to the tens place. 9 times 2 is 18. Write the 8, carry the 1. 9 times 3 is 27, plus 1 is 28. Now I'm multiplying by decimals, so I need to put the decimal place in the right spot. There's 1, 2 decimal places, which means my answer has to have 2 decimal places, which means I put it right there in between the 2 8s. So my answer is 28.80. Okay, which is really close to 30. So if you got that one right, great job. Okay, let's move on to problem 12 and let's see how you did. So we're going to start with the estimate. 30% is really, really close to 40%. 40% is the same thing as 2/5. So it's going to be 2/5 of, which means times 50. And I'm going to make a 50 a fraction. So now I'm just multiplying by fractions. So I have to look to cross cancel first. Are there any common factors between 5 and 50? Yes, there are. 5. 5 goes into 5 one time. 5 goes into 50 10 times. And now I just multiply across. So 2 times 10 is 20. 1 times 1 is 1, so it would be 20 over 1, which is just the same thing as 20. So our estimate of 39% of 50 would be 20. Now let's go ahead and figure out what the actual value is. To do that, we have to change this percentage into a decimal. We can do that by moving 2 places to the left. We're left with 0.39 of means times 50. So here, there's 2 places here, there's 2 places here. It doesn't matter since they both have 2 places which one I put on top, which one I put on the bottom when I'm multiplying, but I'm going to put the 50 on the bottom because then I can multiply by 0. So I have 0.39 times 50. So I'm going to multiply by 0, which means I'm just going to put a 0 there and then move on to the 5. 5 times 9 is 45. Write the 5, carry the 4. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 4 is 19. Now I just need to put the decimal in the right spot. There's 2 decimal places here, which means my answer has to have 2 decimal places in it. So I put the decimal right there. So I end up with 19 for 0.5, 50 or just 19.5 is my actual, they mean the same thing, actual answer, which is really close to our estimate. So if you got both of those right, great job. Let's move on to problem 13. 12% of 40. So let's go ahead and start with the estimate. 12% is really close to 10%, which is the same thing as 1/10. So 1/10 of 40, make 40 a fraction, 40 over 1. I'm going to multiply these fractions together. So the first thing I'm going to do is look to cross cancel. Is there a common factor between 10 and 40? Yeah, 10. 10 goes into 10 one time, 10 goes into 40 4 times, and then I just multiply across. 1 times 4 is 4, and 1 times 1 is 1, and 4 over 1 is just the same thing as 4. So the estimate is 4. Let's go ahead and find the actual value. Okay, 12%, we need to change that to a decimal, so we're going to move it over 2 places, 1, 2 to the left. So we end up with 0.12 of means times 40, just 40. Okay, so we have to multiply these two numbers. There's 2 places here and 2 places there, so it doesn't matter which one we put on top, which one we put on the bottom. I'm going to put 40 on the bottom because it has a 0. So we're going to multiply that, 0.12 times 40. Multiply by 0 first. That means you just put a 0 there, and then I can move on to the tens place. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 1 is 4. And now I just need to figure out the right place to put the decimal. There's 2 decimal places here, so my answer has to have 2 decimal places as well. So that means the decimal goes right there between the 4 and the 8, which means my answer is 4.8, which is the same thing as 4.80. That 0 on the end is just unneeded. And that's super close to our estimate, which is 4. So if you got that one right, perfecto. Okay, on to problem 14. The first thing we're going to do is do the estimate. That says estimate. 19% is really close to 20%, which is the same thing as 1/5. So we're going to do 1/5 of, which means times 30, which is already rounded, so we can just leave it as that. 30 over 1, I'm going to make that a fraction. So now we're multiplying fractions. We always look to cross cancel first. 5 and 30, is there a common factor that goes into both? Yeah, 5 goes into 5 1 time, 5 goes into 30 6 times. Now we just multiply across. 1 times 6 is equal to 6, and then 1 times 1 is 1. 6 over 1 is the same thing as 6. So our estimate of 19% of 30 would be 6. Now let's go ahead and figure out what the actual value is. So we're going to go 19% of 30. Well, we need to change this to a decimal, which means we need to move it over 2 places to the left, which means we end up with 0.19 of means times 30. And then we just do the multiplication. 0.19 has 2 places, 30 has 2 places. It doesn't matter which one I put on top, which one I put on the bottom. So I'm going to put 30 on the bottom because I can multiply by 0 and it makes life easier. So I'm going to put 0.19 on top times 30. I multiply by 0, which means it just ends up being 0. Then I move on to the tens place. 3 times 9 is 27. I write the 7 and carry the 2. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 2 is 5. So now I just need to figure out where the decimal place goes. So I have to count up the decimals in the problem. There's 1, there's 2. That means my answer has to have 2 decimal places. And so I'm going to put it right here between the 5 and the 7, which means my answer is 5.7. 5.7 is the same thing as 5.70. That 0 on the end is not needed. So there we go. And this is super duper close to our estimate. So we know that we did it right. If you got both of those right, great job. Okay, on to our last one, 15. Let's see how you did. The first thing we have to do is the estimate. 58%. 58% is really close to 60%, which is the same thing as 3/5. So I'm going to go 3/5 of means times 200. Make that a fraction, 200 over 1. Let's go ahead and whenever we're multiplying fractions, we want to look to cross cancel first. So is there a common factor between 5 and 200? Yes, 5 goes into both because, well, that's 5, that's obvious, but this ends in a 0 and 5. Anytime a number ends in a 0 or 5, you know that 5 goes into it. So to determine how many times 5 goes into 200, I could go 200 divided by 5 and do the long division, or I could think about how many times does 5 go into 100. Well, 5 goes into 100 20 times, so that means that it would go into 200. It would be 20 plus the other 20, which means it would go in 40 times. So 5 goes into 200 40 times, and 5 goes into 5 1 time. And now we just multiply across because we can't cross cancel anything there. 3 times 40, since there's a 0, I can just do 3 times 4, which is 12, and then add the 0 on the end. And then I have 1 times 1 on the bottom, which is just 1, so my answer is 120. Cool. Now let's figure out the actual value. So we have 58%. We need to convert that to a decimal, which means we're going to move it over 2 places to the left, and we end up with 0.58 of means times 200. Okay, so 0.58 has 2 places, 200 has 3 places, so I need to go ahead and put the 200 on top. Even though it has all those zeros, I still have to put, has 3 places, this has 2 places, so I have to put 200 on top and then multiply it by 0.58. Okay, then I just do the multiplication. 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 0 is 0, 8 times 2 is 16. Okay, now I'm in the tens place, so I need to add a 0 there. Now I can start. 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 2 is 10. And then I add 0, 0, 6 plus 0 is 6, 1 plus 0 is 1, and 1. And now I just need to put the decimal in the right spot. So in the problem, there's 2 decimal places, which means my answer has to have 2 decimal places, which means the decimal goes right here between the 6 and the 0, which means my final answer is 116, which is, you know, for the most part, kind of close to 120. But you would still, if you rounded 116, you'd round it up to 120. So yeah, there's our estimate. If you got all of those right, you did a great job, and we will see you next time. All right, bye-bye.